Alright, let me get better shade here. Much better. Okay. I was working at Cigna Insurance Company, and I was suspect by my manager, but she was outvoted and I was hired. But now she tried every which way to get me fired. For some reason, I found out later it was because I was a Christian. Her father was a pastor, and she didn't like the idea that I was going to seminary. It just reminded her of her father or something. She set up a formal meeting in actually a closet kind of office. She gathered all her ammunition and had the new manager that took Nancy's place to join her. This is Kathy. And Kathy was ordered to find every little bit of information or evidence about me that could cause me to be terminated. So, we met in a closed office, and my trial began. I was told that I violated company confidentiality by speaking to a temp worker in the elevator. It was just a conversation. I don't know who overheard us, but it was reported. I empathized with her because she was let go that week. I didn't say anything specific. Oh, gee, I'm sorry to do that. I also continued to rebel by not changing the style of my sixes. That was a devastating, evil thing for me to do. I wrote a 6 like it was 6, like on a typewriter. I lifted up my arms in a stretch one morning and when I seated in my cube, I was seated in my cube. And lastly, I put papers on the floor. That was what the evidence against me was. So my defense inflamed Pat to no end. I'm defending myself. My 6s are like a typewriter. Why can't you stretch? There's nothing written about that. And I put my papers on the floor because there's no room on my desk, and everybody does that. You get overloaded with paperwork in the insurance companies. She was visibly shaken at the end of the hearing. She could not produce evidence of unsatisfactory 6s, nor specific regulations against private conversations in the elevator, nor rebut the point that others, including herself, put papers on the floor. I noted that she even kicked my work onto the floor herself. I was just going there, sorting through it so I could work with it, and she just went over and kicked it and went all over the floor. And she said, now pick it up. Other issues were brought up from the notes that my neighbor made on her legal pad. She told a neighbor to write down everything I did. And stretching was not allowed. Which, with each defense I made, like, where is it written I can't stretch? The manager objected I had anything to say at all. Finally she said, what are you, a lawyer? I thought I was on trial here, aren't I? I answered. I was put on final notice. One more infraction, an immediate dismissal. Heaven forbid I should write my 7s wrong. After this I was told to go to lunch. I was not to divulge anything about the meeting. I didn't have much of an appetite, but I went to lunch anyway because I was told to. I joined some people from my group. They seemed to know what was going on and empathized with me. Everyone was concerned about me and asked what happened. I forgot and began to comment a little bit on what happened, a mental lapse. But I stopped in mid-sentence, didn't really say anything, as two things occurred to me. I wasn't supposed to say anything, and Pat and the new manager were peering out from behind a nearby building column to try to overhear what I said. They had followed me into the cafeteria and were trying to catch me divulging the secrets of our meeting. They saw that I had spotted them, so they came over to the table and asked everyone if I had divulged anything. Everyone said no. They went away, unable to get me terminated. The rest of the week, Kathy, Pat's chief spy, kept sneaking up behind me as I worked. She looked over my shoulder to see how I got so many bills done in an hour, so many more than everybody else. When I stamped the bills in, I sorted them into categories so that they would be much easier to key in. I thought nothing of this. That's the way you normally worked. Others were doing it this way as well. I took the key from them. But this was classified as cheating. To be more efficient is cheating. Maybe I should have stood up on my head and did my work and slowed it down. I was ordered to cease and desist. I wrote a letter of protest and signed it. Security was called in to accompany me as I cleaned out my desk. They escorted me into the elevator and out of the building. I was really terminated. And they really enjoyed watching me pack my bag into a box with a security guard looking on. I was instructed never to trespass on the property again. How vicious I had been. They forced me to walk off the property to a distant bus stop because my usual stop, they said, was still on Cigna property. I was refused unemployment. I kept notes of the daily harassment and abuse at the suggestion of a co-worker. She noticed what Pat was doing. She'd seen her do it before. I submitted this evidence on an appeal to the Texas State Unemployment Commission. It was compelling enough to get a no-fault verdict. EEOC recognized the abuse, but could not proceed because they said it was not race, gender, or religion-based. Well, I was a minority, actually, but my race was a majority. My gender was a majority, and my religion was an issue. I noticed in my initial employment hearing that Pat took a dim view that I was a seminary student. Upper management at Cigna reviewed the notes and determined that I was paranoid. The Texas State Board of Workmen's Compensation finally discovered hundreds of unpaid claims hidden in Pat's cabinets, which she stated were processed. She was so involved in micromanagement, she didn't take care of getting the real job done. Her 20-year career was put to an end, at least at Cigna, but not before she fired me. It's tithing and a second baptism. About this time, a friend from my church, Richard, and I were visiting Grauweiler Baptist Church before going to Berean Memorial Church every Sunday. Our participation in the Sunday school class so impressed the staff that we were both offered teaching assignments. There were two requirements, however. Get water baptized again the Southern Baptist way, and don't teach about tithing from the Bible. They knew what the Bible said about tithing and didn't want me to teach against their way of collecting money. Needless to say, I declined the offer because I wasn't willing to go against what God said in His Word to please the leaders at the church. So they became a bit cold about my attendance at their church, and I soon got the message and stopped coming. Of course, I didn't get water baptized either because I did it already. You don't need two baptisms to signify or symbolize Christ's baptism in the Holy Spirit of you. One baptism for the remission of sins, water baptism symbolized that one. Don't need two. Chapter 15, permanently temporary. I'm a man of means, by no means, king of the temps. I'm a temp whether I want to or not, even when I'm permanent. Master grip. This was a telemarketing job. We received calls from people ordering golf equipment about viewing a TV commercial. There was insane pressure to get multiple sales out of each customer. The manager would periodically listen in on your calls, rudely interrupt you in mid-sentence, and take over the conversation. Then you'd get a mean-spirited, foul-mouthed lecture on what you did wrong. You know, I think the higher up you go, the more foul-mouthed you're supposed to become. One day, a group of men with guns drawn broke through the door of the office. Real guns. I heard, "Freeze!" So that's what I did. They had bulletproof vests on with ATF on them. I pulled out my Social Security card and showed the man, feeling the cold pressure of his firearm near my face. They left and went downstairs. I could see them moving around a circle of warehouse workers seated on the floor. They handcuffed them and took them out of the building. I called the temp agency and told them to reassign me. I don't want to have that happen every day. I had already had my fill of customer complaints about golf gloves leaking dye, shirts with two different collar sizes, and clubs breaking off and flying down the fairway, and now guns pointed at me. Instead, the agency terminated me without possibility of future assignments. Just as well, I got nervous on the phone when the gun was pointed at me. I'm not used to that kind of training. That's why it's good to have more than one agency work for you. Old worn-out suit and shoes, don't pay no insurance dues. Temp man. First American Real Estate Tax Service. Pod work. I started in a work group called a pod with 6 others, some temps, some permanent. You couldn't tell the difference at first, but wait a few minutes and the permanent ones will let you know who they are. We were in competition with other pods, so every move we made was monitored by Coach Kathy, another Kathy. We sorted tubs and property tax notices. The whole sections were usually in order so that I put those aside. I renumbered the sorting machine to coincide with my batch, so I found the task was fairly easy. I didn't realize I was working too smart, too fast again. There you go. The guy next to me had the right idea. He was a real sleeper. Several times an hour I'd nudge him to wake him up so his head wouldn't hit the desk. It was amazing to watch this man sleeping on the job like that and still appear to be at work. But his production was what the pod was looking for. Not mine. I was too fast. Retrieval with Mary. I got transferred to Mary's department several weeks later. The statistician said my production figures were off the chart. It threw off the competition. See, I was making it unfair because I was doing my job. My punishment was to retrieve bills for Mary. It was frustrating work. They could be anywhere. Instructions were deliberately poor, Karen admitted, the one who was training me, because she wanted to work alone. Mary set up her area backwards, right to left, in reverse alphabetical order. I wondered if she knew anyone at Hubble Lighting, which did things backwards. I used common sense to observe patterns where the bills most likely would be found. The job was not really that hard. Karen was forever angry with me. I was just acting like the temp I was trained to be, trying to do the best I could. I learned to avoid Karen when her medicine didn't keep her calm. Mary reassigned Karen to the pods after one particularly outraged tirade on me. We sort of traded jobs. Perception rules. I had a number of opportunities to share my faith with others in Mary's area. Several of my co-workers had a lot of interest in spiritual things, so we talked a lot about the doctrines of the faith while we worked. But there were a few who listened into our conversations and were offended by what we were talking to one another about. Mrs. Smith, Mary's manager, called me into her office one day. She shared with me that she was a fellow Christian, a Baptist. She told me that my conversation with others on the job was perceived as offensive to them. I asked why they had to listen to our conversations. We were all allowed to talk with one another as we worked. She said that the rule of perception had to be followed, that if someone found your conversation, no matter what the subject, was offensive to them, even though it was not directed to them, you had to stop talking about whatever you were talking about. Keep in mind, we worked in separate areas, but you could overhear from another area. I responded that it was against recent Supreme Court rulings to restrict the topic of conversation like that. I said, suppose I was offended that they were offended. Then the offensive rule works both ways. I quietly got up and went back to work. Nothing more was made of my offensive talk about Jesus, although I lowered my voice and made sure that I wasn't overheard this time. I noted that the ones who complained about me had been constantly bringing up the subject of special miraculous spiritual gifts with me, but they did not like my point of view from the Bible on what they spoke to me about. The complaining parties transferred out of Mary's department, so the coast was clear to be normal once again. Mary seemed to like me a lot. She was a non-practicing Roman Catholic and listened to my conversations now and again. Her husband had cancer and it didn't look good, so she seemed to be interested in spiritual things for the moment. Sad to say, her interest did not quite bring her or her husband to simply trust in Jesus to save them. But she heard the gospel, and I pray that she and her husband will do that soon. Promises. Then came an annual project. If I did it well, Mary's manager, Mrs. Smith, promised me a full-time job. Last year, this project took months to do. It was nearly impossible to keep track of the tubs. Answer, large colored stickers, one color for each stage of the project. Hence, one need only look for the tubs with a particular color sticker and did not have to keep track of tubs individually throughout the building. Sucker. Mary saw what I did for Mrs. Smith and asked me to propose a new layout for her area. So I did some drawings proposing mobile shelving carts to replace her static shelving. The carts would be used to move entire groups of tubs around instead of carrying them one tub at a time. Everyone was excited about it, so I was promoted to planner, purchasing agent, project coordinator, installer with a promise and no pay raise. Mary's husband helped me to dismantle the shelving. Other than that, I was on my own. I did detailed drawings, bargained with suppliers, recommended purchases, unloaded and installed all the equipment all by myself for $6.75 an hour and another broken promise. Grand success. I got a new coffee cup and a letter of commendation as the Kelly Services Nationwide Temp of the Month. I was personally handed this letter by a Kelly executive along with a brand new keychain. No money, no promotion, no full-time job. The kudos were many, the promises kept none. The keychain was too bulky, I don't drink coffee. Mrs. Smith was let go.